Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Louisiana's history. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are and what time it is when you listen to this narration. We want to know where and when these documented accounts are seen. The plantation looked like a white statue in the dark green Louisiana swamps, which are only 15 miles east of Baton Rouge. People thought that the Whitaker estate was one of the most productive sugar plantations in East Baton Rouge Parish in 1847. The Louisiana State Archives say that it was a very wealthy property that stretched almost 800 acres from the Mississippi River to the east. The Whitaker plantation was not different from other plantations because of its size or production. It was different because of what happened inside the main house, especially in the attic room with the small round window that looked west toward the river. The parish census of 1,837 is the first official record of Ruth Whitaker. The Louisiana Historical Society has records that say she was a female child, aged 10 years, residing at Whitaker Plantation. In 1847, 10 years later, census takers came back and recorded Ruth Whitaker as female, aged 10 years again. The census taker wrote in the margin, "Possible clerical error from previous census." But this was not a clerical error. What happened next would become one of the most disturbing mysteries in Louisiana's history before the Civil War, and it was kept secret for more than 100 years. In 1962, researchers at Baton Rouge University got a rare oral history from Josephine Blanchard, whose grandmother worked as a maid in the Whitaker house. "My grandmother would only talk about the Whitaker girl late at night, and even then, she would only whisper. She said the girl didn't grow at all, not a single inch or day. They kept her in the attic room so that no one could see her, but everyone knew. Everyone who worked there knew." The Whitaker family moved to Louisiana from Massachusetts in 1828 and bought land along the Mississippi River during the sugar boom. Bradford Whitaker and his wife Ella Lanena had 3 sons. Their immigration papers didn't say anything about a daughter. According to records from the Port of New Orleans, the family came with 6 trunks, 3 cases of books, a piano, and other household items. 9 years after they got there, Ruth is mentioned for the first time. County property records show that Bradford Whitaker hired people to make major changes to the main house in 1840. These changes included what architectural plans called a special room with enhanced privacy features. People who worked on the building later said that the room had strange features. The walls were lined with cork to keep out noise. There was a separate ventilation system, and the door had 3 locks, all of which opened from the outside. As was common in private homes at the time, not much was written down about what happened inside the Whitaker plantation walls, but bits and pieces came to light through household records, letters, and stories from people who worked on the property. About 70 enslaved people worked on the plantation's fields, and 6 house servants worked in the main house. Only 2 of these 6 were allowed to go into the attic room. A woman named Sarah, and a man whose name was only mentioned in household accounts as Thomas the Elder. A letter discovered among Dr. James Merritt, the Whitaker family's doctor, gives us a rare look inside. The letter, which was written on the 3rd of April 1843, was never sent, but it was kept with Merritt's papers and given to the Louisiana Medical Historical Society in 1961. "Doctor," Merritt wrote to a co-worker at Harvard Medical School, "I have a case that goes against everything we know about medicine." According to her parents, the child is now 15 years old, but she looks like she's only 10. She hasn't shown any signs of growing up that are normal for her age. Her height has stayed the same at 49 inches for the last 4 years that I've been watching her. Most perplexing is that even minor wounds and abrasions heal with remarkable rapidity, often within hours. I've thought about glandular disorders, but I can't find anything in medical literature that explains such a complete stop in growth. The parents don't want to talk to specialists or write down the case formally. Most nights, I can't sleep because I'm in an ethical dilemma. The Whitakers were well known in their community because they went to church regularly and hosted seasonal parties for other plantation owners in the area. Bradford Whitaker was a member of the parish council and was known for being a smart businessman who always bought more property. Eleanor Whitaker was a member of the Ladies' Auxiliary at the First Episcopal Church of Baton Rouge. But even though they were well known, people who visited the home always said that the family was very private. Harriet Lawfield, a guest, wrote in her diary after going to a Christmas dinner in 1845, "The Whitakers have a lovely home, but there are rooms that are clearly off limits. When I got lost looking for the powder room and went up the wrong set of stairs, Whitaker came out of nowhere and scared me so much that I was very surprised. He said that some parts were being fixed and were not safe. During dinner, I saw the servants look up at the ceiling every time the house settled or creaked, which is something that old houses do. A big event happened in the summer of 1846 that was recorded in many places. The Whitaker house caught fire, apparently starting in the kitchen during a thunderstorm. The Baton Rouge Weekly Gazette said, "Flames engulfed the back of one of our parish's best homes. Neighbors and slaves acted quickly to keep the fire from destroying the whole building." The newspaper didn't say that several witnesses later said Bradford Whitaker ran into the burning house and came out of the smoke with what looked like a child wrapped in blankets. He put this bundle in a carriage and left for Baton Rouge right away, even though the house was still on fire. In a 1965 oral history, Thomas LeBlanc, whose ancestors owned the plantation next door, said, "My great-grandfather was one of those who helped fight the fire. He told his kids, and they told us, that Whitaker didn't care about the fire or his things. He ran straight to the attic stairs and was gone for a few minutes, during which time everyone thought he would die. Then he came back with something small in his arms. He didn't talk to anyone or even look at anyone. He just put his things in a carriage and left. He didn't come back until the next day, even though his house was still on fire." Parish records show that Bradford Whitaker took out $800 from the Merchants Bank of Baton Rouge 2 days after the fire. The next week, he wrote to a doctor, Elias Humphrey, a doctor from New Orleans, who is known for treating rare cases and studying tropical diseases. There are no records of any consultation, but the New Orleans Medical Archives have Humphrey's financial records, which show that Bradford Whitaker paid him $700 on the 18th of July, 1846. This was a huge amount of money for medical services at the time. After the fire, the Whitakers shut themselves off even more. They turned down most social invitations and made repairs to the damaged house, including adding a new wing that was separate from the main building but connected by a covered walkway. Architectural plans that were filed with the parish called it a private family annex. During this time, a lot of workers quit the Whitaker household service. Parish employment records, which kept track of how free workers moved from one property to another, show that 4 house servants left the Whitaker employment between August 1846 and February 1847. This was unusual for the time, as these kinds of jobs were very popular. Marie Laveau, a free woman of color who worked for one of these people, later moved to Natchez, Mississippi. This is not to be confused with the famous voodoo practitioner from New Orleans who shares the same name. In 1868, she told a traveling journalist about the Whitaker house, which was published in the little-known journal American Peculiarities. The Whitaker house held secrets that no God-fearing person should see. I worked there for 7 years. But what I saw was too much for my conscience to handle. There was a kid who wasn't a kid. I don't have a lot of schooling, but I do know how things work in nature. Kids grow up, seasons change, and the river rises and falls. But there was something in that house that went against nature. They called her Ruth and said she was their niece from Boston, but she had been there for years and never changed or grown. Every month, the mistress would cut her hair exactly 1 inch, so it was always the same length. The master would always frown when he measured her height against a notch in the doorframe. The girl, if that's what she was, didn't talk much, and when she did, her voice held the wisdom of years that her body didn't show. I left after the fire. When they brought her back, changed. Her eyes were different. They used to hold sadness. After that, they didn't hold anything. In February 1847, The Whitaker plantation was peaceful until Dr. Samuel Cartwright was a well-known doctor in New Orleans who was known for his controversial ideas about race and medicine. There is no official record of his visit, but his personal journal, which he gave to Tulane University in 1959, has a strange entry. Traveled to Baton Rouge, at the insistent request of B.W. to observe the remarkable case he shelters. I saw it with my own eyes, but I still can't believe what I saw. If it's real, it could be either the biggest medical oddity of the century, or something I don't want to name. The child's blood under my microscope showed structures that I have never seen in human tissue before. When I poked it with a needle, the wound closed right in front of me. What bothered me the most was how she acted. She looked at me like a creature would look at a specimen, not like a child would look at an adult. I left with samples, but I don't think I'll be back. Some mysteries might be more like warnings than invitations to find out more. In the winter of 1847, Louisiana had weather that was colder than usual. The Mississippi River froze along its banks for the first time in living memory, and many crops on plantations were hurt. It was during this very cold time in late February that the event happened that would finally bring unwanted attention to the Whitakers' closely guarded secret. According to sheriff's reports kept in the East Baton Rouge Parish Records Office, John Miller, a plantation worker, was found dead on the road between the Whitaker plantation and Baton Rouge on February 27th. The report said that the official cause of death was exposure to elements resulting in freezing, but it also had some troubling information. Miller's body was found just 3 miles from the plantation, on a road he knew well. More importantly, he had a burlap sack with him that held a child's nightgown, a sealed jar of liquid that was later found to be preserved blood, and a leather-bound journal. The journal was Ella Lenana Whitaker's own diary. No one ever found out how Miller got it, but the contents were so troubling that Sheriff Thomas Bogard rode to the Whitaker plantation the next day. The diary itself was no longer available as evidence soon after, but Deputy William Harrove, who was with the sheriff, later gave testimony that was recorded in 1869 during a property dispute over the Whitaker lands that had been left behind. Mrs. Whitaker's diary had notes about the girl they called Ruth, including daily measurements of her height, weight, and other details. There were also notes about her wounds healing quickly, like paper cuts, burns, and even what looked like deliberate cuts. The dates were the most troubling. They went from 1838 to 1847, and all talked about a child who stayed the same. The last thing we read before the sheriff stopped me said, R. spoke today of events from 1792 as if she had seen them. When she was pushed, she got angry and broke her water glass, cutting her palm deeply. We checked how fast the wound healed. It closed completely in 40 minutes. He thinks we should tell someone soon. I disagree. They would take her away from us, or worse, she wouldn't let them. The sheriff told me to wait outside while he talked to Mr. Whitaker. He came back with a pale face. He said we were leaving, and that I shouldn't tell anyone about the diary. The case was closed. There are many records of what happened next. A fire broke out at the Whitaker plantation on the 3rd of March 1847. This fire, unlike the last one, burned down the whole main house and the new annex. The Baton Rouge Weekly Gazette's March 5th issue said, "Tragedy has visited one of our parish's oldest families. A fire that started for no known reason has completely destroyed the Whitaker family's home. We are sorry to say that none of the people in the house survived the fire, which was so strong that it threatened nearby homes. Bradford Whitaker, his wife Ella Lenana, and their family died in the fire. Witnesses say that the fire burned with strange colors and intensity, even after water was put on it. The fire marshal's report from March 7th said, fire of unprecedented temperature and resistance to water. The structure was completely destroyed, leaving only the stone foundation. The human remains found show that there were 5 adult victims. The cause is unknown, but it was probably an accident because the winter weather was so bad that the house had to be heated all the time. Bradford and Ella Lenana Whitaker, 2 housekeepers and a tutor from New Orleans who was visiting, were all adults. There were never any official reports of a child's remains. Afterward,
The Whitaker properties were sold to pay off debts that suddenly appeared against the estate. The land was split up and bought mostly by plantation owners who lived nearby. The land where the house was built was still empty, and local legends said that the ground was cursed or soured by tragedy. The story of Ruth Whitaker might have stayed hidden in parish records and people's memories if it hadn't been for a series of strange events that happened in the years that followed. During the Civil War in 1863, Union troops stationed in Baton Rouge reported a strange event at the old Whitaker property. Lieutenant Josiah Parker of the 6th Michigan Infantry wrote in his official report, "Private Reynolds saw what he thought was a girl in old-fashioned clothes while setting up a forward observation post on the old plantation site east of the city. When Reynolds got closer, he said the child smiled in a way that made him very uncomfortable, and then he went back into the bushes. There was no sign of habitation or passage in the area that was searched." Reynolds was then let go from his job because malaria made him unreliable. In 1871, a survey team that was mapping properties for post-war tax reassessment found something strange at the Whitaker site. According to their field notes, which are kept in the Louisiana State University archives, upon clearing the foundation area for measurement, workers unearthed a small chamber beneath what would have been the eastern wing of the house. The room, which was about 8 feet square and had brick walls, had a child's bed, some old books, and a bunch of small jars with different things in them. A journal written in a child's handwriting from 1791 to 1847 was the strangest thing. The survey leader thought the items were just interesting remnants of the tragic fire that happened decades ago, so he ordered the chamber to be sealed again. The journal was sent with this report, but it looks like it was taken out of the file after that. The last written reference to Ruth Whitaker comes from an unexpected place. Doctor in 1964, Lawrence Coig, a pathology professor at Johns Hopkins University, wrote a paper for the Journal of Rare Medical Phenomena called Historical Cases of Anomalous Cellular Regeneration. He mentioned specimens that Doctor gave to the university in 1848. Samuel Cartwright. "One of the strange things we have in our medical archives is tissue samples that were supposedly taken from a child in Louisiana in 1847. The samples, which were kept in formaldehyde, show cellular structures that are not typical of human tissue. Most importantly, the cells divide and regenerate in ways that we don't think are possible, based on what we know about human biology. The notes that came with the cells say that they came from a person who hadn't aged in more than 10 years. These claims are obviously ridiculous, but the preserved samples themselves are still a real scientific mystery. Modern analysis shows that they are human, but they have chromosomal structures that have never been seen in any other human tissue sample. The specimens were considered historical curiosities and put into storage in 1938. The university couldn't find them when they were asked for this study in 1963. For a long time, the swamps and backwaters of Louisiana have kept secrets, some of which are natural and some of which are man-made. The story of Ruth Whitaker, which is made up of bits and pieces from historical records, personal accounts, and official documents, is still one of the most disturbing. What was she? A child with a medical condition that has never been seen before? The Whitakers did a cruel experiment? Or something else altogether? On that cold March night in 1847, the answers burned, along with the Whitaker house. But maybe not everything was destroyed in the fire. In 1958, a teacher at Baton Rouge Elementary School told the school's administration about a strange event that was recorded in the school's records. A girl about 10 years old got lost from the group on a field trip to the old state capitol. When chaperones found her, she was looking at a picture of Baton Rouge from the 1840 seconds. The teacher said that when asked her name, she said Ruth, and smiled in a way that I thought was rude. She said, "I lived there once before it burned," when I tried to lead her back to the group. The child then went back to her classmates, and even though we checked our attendance records, we couldn't figure out which child was missing because all of the students were there. The old Whitaker plantation site is still empty and hasn't been built on. People in the area stay away from it, especially at dusk, when some say they have seen a small figure watching from the trees. A child in old-fashioned clothes who never ages or comes closer, but just watches, as if waiting for someone to notice her. The questions that have been asked over and over again are, who or what was Ruth Whitaker? What did the Whitakers find or make on their remote plantation in Louisiana? And the worst part is that if Ruth's body was never found in the ashes of the Whitaker home, where did she go? There are reasons why some mysteries are kept hidden, and some secrets are meant to stay hidden in the dark waters of the past. But as long as records exist and memories last, the story of the girl who never aged will continue to haunt the shadows of Louisiana history, a whisper that carries through time, defying both explanation and the natural order itself. The Whitaker property, which had been abandoned after the fire, stayed that way for decades. A businessman from New Orleans named Charles Devereux bought the land in 1879 with plans to start a new sugar business there. According to records from the parish, work began on a new processing plant near the river, on purpose avoiding the site of the old home. Workers said strange things were happening, like tools that would disappear and then show up in different places, cold spots that couldn't be explained even in the summer heat, and most often, seeing a small figure watching from the edge of the woods. Devereux stopped working on the project 3 months after it started. His letter to investors, which is kept in the Louisiana Business Historical Society archives, said that there were unexpected problems with the property and that local superstitions were making workers less reliable. He sold the land for a lot less than it was worth, and it is said that he never went back to Baton Rouge. Over the next few decades, the land changed hands several more times, but no one was able to build anything on it. By 1900, local maps called the area Whitaker Hollow. This name doesn't show up in any official records, but everyone in the area used it. Doctor in 1922 was an anthropologist at Tulane University. While looking into regional folklore, Martin Hebert became interested in the Whitaker case. After he died in 1967, his field notes were found. They show that he talked to older people whose parents and grandparents had lived near the Whitaker plantation. Mrs. Augusta Thibodeau, 87, whose father worked on a nearby plantation, said, "Papa wouldn't talk about the Whitaker girl until after his third whiskey. He said that she was old behind her eyes, and that she would watch you like she was trying to remember your face." The house slave said she had been with the family since before they moved to Louisiana. But that can't be true because she was still a child. Papa told Mama, she's free now. After the fire, when they couldn't find any child's remains. He didn't mean it like a soul going to heaven. He meant it like something getting away. Dr. Hebert's notes also mention a journal he found that belonged to Josephine Blanchard. Her grandmother had worked for the Whitaker family. Mrs. Blanchard let me look at a small leather book that she says belonged to her grandmother. It looks like the journal has notes about the Whitaker child written by a servant who worked in the house. Most of the entries are boring and just say what the child ate, what they did, and what they said. What makes the story so interesting are the dates, which go from 1838 to 1847, and the fact that the child didn't change physically. The last entry, from the 2nd of March 1847, the day before the deadly fire, says, "Miss Ruth refused dinner again and sat by the window looking out at the road all day. When I brought her tea at dusk, she turned to me and said, 'Thomas is gone, but he took what they needed. They'll be here soon to see for themselves. You need to leave tonight.'" Her voice didn't sound like a child's voice anymore. Dr. Mrs. Hebert tried to get the journal for the university archives, but she couldn't. Blanchard wouldn't let it go. Her family said that the journal was missing from her things after she died in 1924. What happened to Dr. Hebert's research adds another creepy chapter to the Whitaker mystery. Hebert wrote to a Harvard colleague in November 1922, "I have found documents that suggest the Whitakers wrote a lot to a scientific society in Boston before they moved to Louisiana. A letter from Elalina Whitaker to her sister in Massachusetts from 1827 is very interesting. It talks about the extraordinary child we have been entrusted with, and their plans to move to a more private place where the research can continue undisturbed. I leave for Boston tomorrow to look into these links more." Hebert's research notes from Boston in December 1922 contain a big finding. The New England Society for Medical Advancement's archives contained letters between Bradford Whitaker and members of the society from 1824 to 1827. It seems that they were mostly interested in ideas about how cells can regenerate and how people might live longer. Whitaker, who seems to be one of the founding members, wrote a lot about tests on a girl who was only called Subject R. In the Society's minutes from January 1827, there was a motion to stop the unnatural experiments on the child and turn her over to the right authorities. One vote against the motion, with Whitaker's vote being the deciding one. 3 months later, the group broke up. Most troubling was finding a daguerreotype from 1826 that showed members of society. There is a small girl in the background who looks a lot like Ruth Whitaker, even though the picture is not very clear. If this is true, the child would have been in Boston at least 2 years before the Whitakers moved to Louisiana. Hebert's last research entry, from the 23rd of December 1922, says, "Today I went to Harvard Medical School's archive specimens and asked to see anything related to Bradford Whitaker or the New England Society. The archivist found a sealed box with Whitaker's name on it that had not been opened since it was given to him in 1848. There was a jar inside with what looked like a tissue sample preserved in solution and a note that said, 'Confirming your suspicions. The child is not human as we understand humanity. Maybe not a child at all. Please forgive us for what we've done. S.C. The archivist let me take a small sample for modern analysis. Tomorrow, I leave for New Orleans with the sample.'" Dr. Hebert never went back to New Orleans. Boston police records show that he got on his scheduled train on December 24th, but when it got to its destination, he was not on it. His luggage, which included all of his research materials except the specimen and his most recent notes, was found in his compartment. The official investigation came to the conclusion that he probably got off at an unplanned stop. Even after a lot of searching, there was no sign of Doctor. They never found Hebert. Interest in the Whitaker case died down until 1948, when surveying part of the old plantation land was needed for the building of a new highway near Baton Rouge. Records from the East Baton Rouge Parish Engineering Department show that workers digging near the old foundation found a small underground chamber that had survived the fire in 1847. There were a lot of things in the room, like a child's dress, preserved books, and a collection of glass plates that were early photographic negatives that looked like they were showing microscopic studies of tissue samples. Dr. Walter Freeman from Louisiana State University was asked to look into the results. His report says, "The photographic plates show cellular structures that I have never seen before in 25 years of pathological research. The cells look like human cells on the outside, but they have a lot of problems, especially in the parts that make up the mitochondria. Most notable is the evidence of cellular division patterns that indicate remarkable regenerative abilities. It is impossible to prove that these images are real without the actual tissue samples. However, if they are real, they show a cellular structure that could theoretically be able to regenerate continuously, which is basically biological immortality. The artifacts were sent to LSU for more research, but university records show that they were never officially added to any department's collections. When the university told Freeman in 1953 that the items had been sent to the right federal authorities, but they didn't say why. An unusual event in 1959 brought the Whitaker mystery back into the public eye for a short time. While fixing up an antebellum home in Baton Rouge's Garden District, workers found a hidden compartment in the attic that held a journal from 1853. The journal was written by Sheriff Thomas Bogard, who had looked into the Whitaker plantation not long before the fire that killed them. The Baton Rouge Advocate published parts of the letter. "I have been silent about the Whitaker affair for 6 years. But now that my health is failing, I must write down the truth. What we saw at the plantation that day was an offense against nature. The girl they called Ruth wasn't a child at all. Whitaker showed me records that went back to 1791, 56 years ago. The measurements, the look, and the child were all the same. He said that archaeologists in Massachusetts had found her sealed in a chamber under a native burial site that was there before Europeans settled there. He said that the walls of the chamber had symbols that no known civilization had ever used. The most upsetting thing was how short my conversation with the child was. When Whitaker let me talk to her, she called me by my first name, which I hadn't given her. Her voice changed from childlike simplicity to disturbing maturity. When I asked her how old she was, she smiled and said, "I was already old when the first men came to these shores. I left right after that, and told Deputy Hargrove not to tell anyone about it." 3 days later, the fire destroyed the Whitaker home. I was in charge of the recovery effort, and I made sure that some discoveries were not recorded. We found the bodies of the Whitakers and their staff. We did not find any remains of a child. We did find a tunnel in the ashes of the annex that led away from the property and toward the river. It looked like it had been used recently. I told them to collapse it and seal it right away. I have been looking for signs that the child will come back for years. I think she is still with us, unchanged, and waiting. God have mercy on all of us. After the journal excerpts were published, the advocate got dozens of letters from people saying they had seen a strange child who looked like Ruth in Baton Rouge history. Most were written off as hysteria or hoaxes, but some came from honest people who had no reason to lie. During the height of the Cold War in 1963, a company that later turned out to be a front for government research interests quietly bought the former Whitaker property. Excavation equipment worked day and night for almost 3 months, while armed guards kept watch around the site. Through official channels, people were discouraged from asking questions. When operations stopped, the property was left empty again, and no one explained what had happened there. In 1989, a Freedom of Information Act request led to heavily redacted documents that showed the U.S. government had done an operation at the site called Longevity Prime. The only part that wasn't blacked out said, "The samples that were found match those in the Harvard Medical Archive designation, WR 1847. The structure of the cells backs up what was found before. The subject has not been found. Suggest keeping an eye on regional reports that match the established profile." The most recent known event linked to the Whitaker case took place in September 1968. A family driving through Louisiana said they saw a young girl walking alone on Highway 30 outside Baton Rouge during a rainstorm. They told the police that the child, who was about 10 years old, wore strange clothes, like an old-fashioned nightgown, and spoke in a strange, formal way. The family's story goes on. She said her name was Ruth and that she was trying to get to New Orleans. When we asked her about her parents, she said, "They died in the fire a long time ago. But they weren't really my parents." We decided to take her to the nearest police station. But when we stopped for gas in Gonzales, she wasn't in the car anymore. It was very disturbing to us that we never saw her get out of the car. We gave our daughter a coat because she was wet from the rain, but she left it on the seat where it was completely dry. Local officials said the report was either made up or a mistake about who was running away. After a short investigation, the case was closed. But the officer who was there wrote in his journal, which was found after his death in 1996, "The description matches exactly the stories my grandfather told of the Whitaker child. Same age, same appearance, same creepy way of speaking. I felt a chill I can't explain when I got the case. There are things in this world that we can't understand, and maybe even shouldn't know." The Whitaker plantation site is still undeveloped today. It is a large piece of land that has grown over and is surrounded by modern buildings. People in the area still stay away from it, especially after dark. Parents in nearby towns tell their kids not to go on Whitaker land, but not many can say what they think will happen there. The mystery of Ruth Whitaker is a disturbing footnote in Louisiana history that brings together science, superstition, and the unknown. There is still some evidence, but it has been lost, hidden, or scattered. There are pieces of history that suggest there was something outside of our understanding of natural law. A child who never grew up, whose cells regenerated with perfect accuracy, and who may have had knowledge that spanned centuries. If the stories are true, Ruth Whitaker, if that was ever her real name, would be more than 230 years old today. If the pattern of historical sightings holds true, she would still look like a 10-year-old girl. The rational mind rejects such possibilities as folklore, misidentification, or intentional deception. Scientific understanding disavows the notion of cellular immortality in intricate organisms. However, the incomplete evidence, the consistent accounts spanning decades, the absence of scientific specimens, and the government's inexplicable interest in an abandoned plantation indicate phenomena that transcend conventional explanation. The last entry in Dr. Hebbert's notes, which he wrote on the train in December 1922, have been found. The last thing he wrote down before he went missing was, "When I woke up in my compartment, there was a girl about 10 years old with dark hair sitting across from me. Her eyes reflected the lights in the compartment in a strange way. She was wearing modern clothes for kids, but the way she stood and moved made it clear that she was an adult." "You've been asking me questions," she said. "Hebbert, every generation or so, they always send someone. It keeps happening because you don't learn." When I asked what she meant, she smiled a smile that witnesses have described for over 100 years and said, "Some of us were here before you and will be here long after you. We change our names, how we look, and the stories we tell, but we stay the same." She reached for my specimen case, and even though I tried to stop her, my arms and legs felt heavy. She took the tissue sample and said, "This is mine. A small piece, but still mine." I heard her last words, "Sleep now, doctor," as my mind started to fade. You'll be in a different place when you wake up. You'll have a new goal. As I write this, I feel like I'm drifting again. A station is coming up. I don't know what the landscape looks like outside the window. People who shared a train car with Hebbert said he looked like he was alone the whole time. Train staff and other passengers did not see any child who fit his description. But his luggage stayed behind, his body was never found, and the mystery he looked into still echoes through the swamps and shadows of Louisiana history. Over the years, stories have continued to come out. A child who shows up for a short time and then disappears. A girl who knows things she shouldn't know. And a small figure watching from the edge of our world. The written history ends, but the legend lives on, whispered from generation to generation. The girl who never aged, who survived fire and time, and who waits in the shadows of history for reasons that only she knows. Is Ruth Whitaker still out there, unchanged while everything else changes? Does she still watch from the edges of our perception, a living relic of scientific ambition that crossed lines that should never have been crossed? We might never find out. Maybe that was planned too. People who drive Highway 30 east of Baton Rouge, especially on rainy nights, still tell people the same thing. If you see a little girl walking alone on the side of the road, keep driving. It's better to leave some stories unfinished and some mysteries unsolved. This is the documented story of Ruth Whitaker, the girl who never grew up. She is a whisper from Louisiana's dark past that still doesn't make sense, even to science and the natural order.